On a remote island in Indonesia, surrounded by ocean on every side, cut off from the rest of the world for hundreds of thousands of years, a species of human lived a life unlike anything we thought possible. They stood just 3.5 feet tall. They hunted elephants. They lived alongside giant rats the size of dogs. And for nearly 1 million years, they thrived, completely unknown to the rest of humanity. We only discovered them in 2003. This is the story of Homo floresiensis, the Hobbits of Flores. And the more we learn about them, the stranger and more wonderful the story becomes. In September 2003, a joint Australian-Indonesian archaeological team was excavating Liang Bua, a vast, cathedral-like cave on the island of Flores in eastern Indonesia. They were expecting to find evidence of early modern humans. What they found instead stopped the scientific world cold. Buried under 6 meters of sediment was a skeleton, nearly complete, clearly bipedal. It walked upright. Clearly tool-using. Stone tools surrounded it. But the skull was tiny. The body was tiny. Everything about it was tiny. Lead researcher Peter Brown initially estimated the individual was a child, but analysis of the teeth, the bone density, and the fused growth plates told a different story. This was a fully grown adult. A fully grown adult who stood just 106 centimeters tall, roughly 3.5 feet, with a brain the size of a grapefruit, designated LB1, and nicknamed Little Lady of Flores, or simply Flo. This skeleton was unlike anything in the human fossil record. It didn't match Homo sapiens. It didn't match Homo erectus. It was something else entirely. When the findings were published in Nature in October 2004, the reaction from the scientific community was somewhere between astonishment and disbelief. Some researchers refused to accept it was a new species, arguing LB1 must have been a modern human with a medical condition like microcephaly. But as more bones emerged from the cave, remains of at least 9 individuals, all similarly tiny, the evidence became undeniable. This was not a sick modern human. This was a population, a species. One that had been living on this island, completely unknown to science, until just 50,000 years ago. The hobbits were real, and science had to rebuild everything it thought it knew about human evolution. The first question scientists asked was obvious. How does a human species shrink to 3.5 feet tall? The answer is one of evolution's most fascinating phenomena: island dwarfism. When large animals become isolated on islands, they face a very specific set of pressures. Food is limited. There are no large predators to escape from. The evolutionary advantages of being big, intimidating rivals, outrunning predators, largely disappear. But the disadvantages of being big, consuming enormous calories, requiring vast territory, remain. Under these conditions, evolution reliably pushes large species towards smaller body sizes across generations. It's been observed in elephants, hippos, deer, and now, extraordinarily, in humans. The ancestors of Homo floresiensis were most likely Homo erectus, a full-sized human species that stood around 5.5 feet tall and had a brain 3 times larger than Floresiensis. Fossil evidence suggests Homo erectus reached Flores as early as 1 million years ago, possibly by rafting or swimming across the ocean straits during periods of lower sea level. Once isolated, with limited food resources and no large predators, the population began to shrink, not deliberately, not consciously, but through the ruthless logic of natural selection. Smaller individuals needed fewer calories. Smaller individuals survived longer. Smaller individuals reproduced more. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the population contracted toward a stable, smaller size. How small? Brain volume shrank from roughly 900 cubic centimeters in Homo erectus to just 380 cubic centimeters in Floresiensis, smaller than a chimpanzee's brain. Body mass dropped from around 60 kilograms to approximately 25 kilograms. An entire human lineage compressed by an island into something the world had never seen before, and might never see again. If the hobbits themselves are extraordinary, the world they inhabited is almost beyond imagination. Flores was not a normal island. It was an evolutionary pressure cooker. And island dwarfism hadn't just shrunk the humans. It had shrunk almost everything. The island was home to Pygmy Stegodon, a dwarf species of prehistoric elephant that stood roughly shoulder height to a modern human. These weren't the mammoths of Ice Age Europe. They were compact, island-adapted creatures, and Homo floresiensis hunted them. Stone tools found at Liangbua and other Flores sites show clear evidence of butchering marks on Stegodon bones. These 3.5-foot humans, with grapefruit-sized brains, were coordinating hunts against animals many times their size. But island dwarfism works in the opposite direction too. While large species shrink on islands, small species, freed from large predators, often grow. On Flores, giant rats, papagomes, armanvilli, and related species grew to the size of rabbits, some possibly larger. These weren't just pests, they were likely prey. Archaeological sites show evidence of rat bones being processed for food alongside elephant bones. And then there were the Komodo dragons, the world's largest living lizards, which also called Flores home. These ambush predators, reaching up to 3 meters in length and capable of killing prey far larger than themselves, would have been a constant lethal presence in the Floresiensis landscape. Living alongside Komodo dragons while standing 3.5 feet tall requires a level of environmental awareness and collective coordination that speaks to real cognitive capability, whatever the size of their brain. Flores was a lost world, and the Hobbits were its most improbable rulers. Here's where Homo floresiensis gets truly remarkable, and where scientists are still arguing today. By every standard measure of brain size, Floresiensis should not have been capable of complex behavior. Their brain volume was smaller than a chimpanzee's. The standard scientific assumption, that bigger brains equal greater intelligence and behavioral complexity, predicted these creatures should have been cognitively limited. The archaeological record says otherwise. The stone tools found alongside Floresiensis remains are not primitive. They include carefully crafted blades, points, and flake tools that show deliberate, multi-step manufacture, the kind of tool production that requires planning, skill transfer, and what archaeologists call mental templates. You have to hold a vision of the finished tool in your mind while you make it. There is also evidence of fire use at Flores sites. Hearths containing charred animal bones suggesting cooking, coordinated hunting of animals larger than themselves, and possibly, though this remains debated, symbolic behavior. How? How does a brain the size of a grapefruit produce this level of behavioral complexity? CT scans of the LB1 skull reveal something interesting. While the overall brain was small, certain regions associated with higher cognitive function, particularly the frontal lobes and temporal lobes, were proportionally larger and more elaborately folded than you'd expect. The brain hadn't just shrunk uniformly, it had reorganized. Homo floresiensis may represent proof of one of the most exciting ideas in paleoanthropology, that the organization of a brain matters as much as its size. That cognitive complexity is not simply a function of volume, but of architecture. Small brain, big mind, possibly. Homo floresiensis survived on Flores for an extraordinary length of time, possibly close to 1 million years. And then, around 50,000 years ago, they vanished. The timing is both significant and haunting. Because 50,000 years ago is approximately when Homo sapiens, our species, began moving through Southeast Asia in significant numbers. Was it us? Did modern humans, arriving on or near Flores, bring disease, competition, or direct conflict that ended the Hobbit lineage? It's possible. The same timing marks the disappearance of megafauna and other archaic human species across much of the world as sapiens expanded. But there's another suspect: volcanic eruption. A thick layer of volcanic ash in Liangbua Cave coincides closely with the disappearance of Floresiensis remains. Flores sits in one of the most volcanically active regions on Earth. A catastrophic eruption could have devastated the local ecosystem, wiping out the island's unique fauna, including its tiny humans. Most likely, the answer is both. A species already stressed by volcanic disruption, potentially already reduced in numbers, would have been extraordinarily vulnerable to competition from the technologically sophisticated newcomers arriving from the mainland. But here is what Homo floresiensis leaves behind, beyond the bones. They leave behind the knowledge that human evolution was not a straight line, that our family tree is not a single trunk, but a vast, branching network, full of species we haven't found yet, stories we haven't told yet, lives we can barely imagine. They were human, differently, completely, magnificently. 3.5 feet tall, hunting elephants on a lost island, gazing up at the same stars we see tonight.